I do prioritize. People say that is wrong. You must take care of all South Africans. What about the black farmers? But I picked the commercial farmers because 90% of the commercial farmers are my people. It's in our DNA to come from Europe to a continent that doesn't, where there's no rain, and they try their clever Western ideas in agriculture and they don't work.
Jesus fucking Christ, are you kidding me? You're interviewing this man, this loser, Steve Hofmeyr. Let me show you just who Steve Hofmeyr is. Steve Hofmeyr is an anti-black white racist in South Africa, a man who nobody respects. Nobody respects this man apart from the other white racists, of whom there aren't that many, thankfully, in South Africa. And I've lived in South Africa for some time. I've been there. So I can tell you about South Africa and how it differs very much from the bullshit lies this man is feeding you. Firstly, white people are not oppressed in South Africa. This man is selling you the most ridiculous load of bullshit I have ever heard on YouTube, and I'm serious. Try to get a job as an African in South Africa. Just try to get a job. You know, the kind of jobs that you'll be getting are, you know, the cheap jobs at stores like ShopRite or Pick and Pay. You know, as an African, they can give you those jobs easily, of course. But try to do anything groundbreaking. Try to move into business, which at this point is quite dominated by white faces. What you'll find as an African man in South Africa trying to move into the business space is that you are discriminated against quite heavily, in the sense that people aren't going to be willing to work with you. Let me give you an example. A friend of mine, runs a pharmaceutical company in South Africa, and he happens to be black. He tried for some time to have his products accepted by, you know, the mainstream stores, you know, the ShopRites and the Pick and Pays and the Clicks and other such things. And they denied him each and every time that he either went there himself or sent a representative who happened to be black, who happened to be brown. As soon as he sent a white man or a white woman, for example, they would always accept the products each and every single time. Proven experiment. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain instances in which being white would work against you, like trying to apply for university, because the government does incentivize universities to take in more black students because, you know, blacks are disadvantaged historically, etc., etc. Actually, this is a form of racism. It is a form of reverse racism, because you're discriminating against white students and accepting black students because you feel they are disadvantaged, which most of them are. But yeah, that's just the way it is. It's the way things have to be, unfortunately, because the pendulum has been swung in one direction. It must therefore be swung in another direction. And reverse racism is the only thing that can do that until the pendulum gets to a point of neutrality. But reverse racism is nothing. It's not widespread. Programs like BEE aren't doing anything to hamper the advancements and attempts of white people who want to do things in business. That's just not happening. It's not widespread. There are very few instances of it, and it does kind of suck, because a certain friend of mine tried to get into pilot school. Okay, it doesn't happen most of the time, but sometimes it does happen. He tried to get into pilot school, and they refused him because he was white. Essentially, the bar was raised much higher for him because he was white. A black student would have needed, let's say, an average pass mark of 60% for his or her subjects before enrolling in the school. But because he was white, he needed, not just white, but because he was white and came from or lived in a certain environment. It's not just the color, but your background that they take into account here. But because he was white and was quite upper class. I mean, the guy wasn't poor at all. You know, he actually had a very nice car for his age. So they said, now your grade needs to be higher than what it is. That does happen sometimes. Not all the time, but it does happen sometimes. And when it does, it definitely sucks for the individuals to whom it happens. It does suck. It's not a nice thing at all. But that's just what happens when an entire race of people is disadvantaged by X, Y, Z, and steps are being made to correct for those disadvantages. It's just what has to happen, unfortunately. But come on, such instances are few and far between. Being black in South Africa is actually, unless you are middle class, unless you have some amount of money and can live in the suburbs, being black in South Africa is it's not a curse, but it can be. It can be in many instances because of morons like Steve Hofmeyr spreading their racist dribble. And interestingly, very few people in South Africa even listen or support this man. Nobody respects him. Not the white people, not the black people, apart from the few white racists that are out there. Google him. I'm not going to blame Stefan for interviewing this man because he just doesn't know any better. But Stefan, Go down to South Africa, see for yourself the situation in which the people live. There are white squatter camps in South Africa, but there are many more black squatter camps. The white squatter camps are a very unfortunate result of what the government has been trying to do by favoring employment amongst blacks. But the employment amongst blacks is only favored in low-tier employment sectors, that is, working the till at stores. Those are the spots that the white people in the squatter camps would have desired, would have liked to take, but can't take because ideally these companies want to look good for the government. So they're going to employ poor black people to fill those spots instead. However, in the upper echelons of the economy, you won't find that many black people. You just won't. You'll find some, but mostly in government, who've acquired these positions through government tenders, many of which were just fraudulent. You know, that's a point of fact. Many of the black people in high positions got there through fraud, but they had to get there through fraud because the system is very much rigged against them, in the sense that unless you are white, getting into that sector of the economy is not easy. It just isn't. You have to go through the government, and in the government there is a lot of fraud. That is a fact. Now, you have to understand something about apartheid and how it ended. Nelson Mandela was in fact a communist tool for the abolition of apartheid. The Rothschild family essentially commissioned Nelson Mandela to assist in ending apartheid. Not because the Rothschilds give a fuck about apartheid and black people or white people, but because they needed a means of accessing some of the wealth and resources in Africa. And Nelson Mandela was one of those means.
My campaign is for the farmers of my community, my tribe, my ethnicity. We have a wonderful word. I think it's a German word called Volk, which is basically a nation in a nation. And they are the Afrikaners. And that is why my campaign is the white farmer in South Africa.
Steve Hofmeyr is the dumbest, and I say this in all seriousness, Steve Hofmeyr is the dumbest anti-black moron I've ever seen on television or ever heard on radio. He constantly campaigns about white lives and how white lives are being killed by black people. White lives, white lives. Forget about all lives matter. This guy is a white lives matter activist. Those of you who hate Black Lives Matter will really hate this guy, but nobody pays him any attention, which is unfortunate because, you see, the problem in South Africa stems from two things: the government and the media. The media is a race-baiting propaganda tool. Okay, racial tension in South Africa is not that bad. It's not anywhere nearly as bad as it was 15 years ago, for example. It really isn't that bad. But any opportunity the media has to incite racial tensions, they will jump to it. This is a fact. Secondly, the government is to blame in the sense that they deliberately are keeping certain populations stupid. They are keeping them ignorant and ensuring that they do not have access to information. For example, people in what they call the locations in South Africa. The locations are essentially ghettos where only poor black South Africans live, and these people don't even have libraries. They don't have access to information, and as a result, they cannot make informed political decisions. The reason many of them kept voting for the ANC, they aren't voting for the ANC anymore. I'll tell you why. The reason most of them kept voting for the ANC is because they had in their minds this idea that if you removed the ANC from power, apartheid would come back. That's a ridiculous idea. It makes no sense. But that's what they believe because that's how uneducated they were. But this is deliberate. You see, let me point you to something that happened a few years ago. A few years ago, it was discovered that lots of books which were intended to be delivered to South African schools in the locations, these books were dumped. Right? These books were thrown away and they didn't make their way to the South African schools. And yet the individual who was contracted to deliver the books was paid all kinds of money. This is deliberate because the ANC government needs to keep ignorant African people ignorant in order to make sure that they keep voting for the ANC government, so that the ANC government can stay in power and, keep on looting essentially. This crazy idea that whites are in any way whatsoever oppressed in South Africa. Look, I've been to South Africa. I have spent a lot of time there. What you're hearing from Steve Hofmeyr is a load of fucking tripe. Go to South Africa and see for yourself. Yes, there is crime in South Africa. Yes, it can be pretty bad. But let me tell you this. There are many areas in South Africa which are very nice to live in. I spent a lot of my time living in Cape Town. Cape Town is the most wonderful city I've ever been in my entire life. I haven't experienced any crime in Cape Town whatsoever. None. Zero. Zilch. Google Cape Town. It's a fantastic place. When I lived in Cape Town for some time, I spent quite a lot of time at a Backpackers. A Backpackers is a place where people from around the world or people just vacationing, whatever, get to spend some nights there, associated with people, whatever. And while there, I got to meet people from all kinds of countries. And the story is the same across the board, where the government is keeping people separated via the media, trying to pin poor people against rich people or black people against white people so that they can rely on a certain group of the population voting for them. It happens in every country. It happens across all societies. It's a fact. So for anti-black morons like Steve Hofmeyr to be interviewed by people who just don't know any better, Stefan Molyneux, and to be spreading this false message, it's very unfortunate. It is truly sad.